Welcome back. It's been a little bit over a week since I last had the opportunity to talk about some of the issues that are going on, but I felt it would be necessary to come back again today and talk about some issues that I think are very controversial and maybe add some focus and some breadth and depth of knowledge to some of the things that are happening. I want to start off first by talking about some of the most recent comments that President Trump made that have a lot of people up in arms, literally and figuratively probably. First of all, when he said that he wants to take the guns first before he worries about due process, I don't think that's what he really meant, and if he did, he's wrong, and that's something that he needs to kind of reel back in and rethink. But what I think he was talking about there are instances around the country, and I can talk from personal experience, where we would go out on calls where usually family members would be concerned about the safety of other family members, and they were concerned that maybe they were going to harm themselves or harm others. And they would state circumstances like he's been acting irrational, he's talked about violence, any one of a number of different factors. And we would go and we would conduct an investigation, and depending on what we found, we would do what we call pink slip them. Now, the pink slipping was nothing more than a short name for the legal process in Ohio, where we're able to state facts and circumstances in a sworn statement to get an individual admitted to the mental health section of a hospital for a 3-day psychological evaluation to determine his or her fitness. And then if there's need for further investigation or further evaluation or assessment with other health professionals, the medical staff are able to get that moving in that direction. But nonetheless, we would typically have an individual where we would take them, sometimes forcibly, to the hospital for the 3-day evaluation. And in some cases, family members would say, hey, he owns a shotgun, a couple pistols, a couple rifles. We don't feel safe with them around the house. Would you mind taking them? And we would, in fact, take them for what we called safekeeping. We would take them to our property room, log them into the property room under the individual's name with contact information, state a brief summary of what it was, link that case number up with the case number relative to the involuntary admission at the hospital, so that when the individual and or family members later down the road came to get them, if the circumstances warranted that, we would simply turn them over once they showed valid identification. Now, if the case proceeded through the mental health, from the initial mental health assessment through to an adjudication by a judge that the individual's incompetent, then in fact we would have to follow the judge's orders, and in some cases that would be either destruction or some other disposition. So I think what he was talking about, when we talk about due process is guaranteed every citizen in the United States in both the 5th and the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And due process basically says that you as an individual cannot be denied life, liberty, or property, or the pursuit of happiness without due process. And due process typically means a court process where you have, in most cases, a judge and or a jury making a decision as to whether or not certain circumstances should exist. So I don't think that's what he meant. If he did truly mean that, that's something that his staff needs to discuss with him, and they need to maybe reissue the statement, but I don't think that was the case. I think he's looking at the majority of the cases, as in Florida, which is kind of where all the attention's been. They talk about the Baker Amendment. The Baker Amendment is the official legal doctrine in Florida, which authorizes law enforcement officers basically essentially to do what I just described to you that we do here in the state of Ohio through the pink slip process. So that was one issue. The other thing I wanted to talk about is President Trump has said things like there's no need to fear the NRA. I personally agree with that. I don't think anybody should fear the NRA or any other entity. The NRA is nothing but an organization that represents specifically the political view of, in their case, millions of members. And even though we have a hierarchy, we have a president and we have various executives and administrators, in essence, we are the NRA. I am the NRA. Every person that is an NRA member is the NRA. So I don't think any politician, any individual should fear the NRA, because there's really nothing to fear. The other thing is that President Trump mentioned that some politicians are petrified of the NRA. I believe that's the case, because they're more interested in their political careers than they are in what's doing right or wrong. So I don't think that was a false statement. I think not only are they fearful of the NRA, but let me give you some stats. The NRA is about they give about $200 million according to recent data that's been released to politicians and to support their agenda. The National Education Association and the AFL-CIO or other unions give over $1.5 billion to such organizations. So when you look at it on the scale, and I don't think we need to be fearful of labor unions either, but I just want you to know that this whole concept of fear, I think, is a misnomer, and I think people throw those words around and make those statements just to kind of promote a specific agenda. So I don't think that's the case at all. He also said the NRA, he spoke to a couple congressmen, a couple senators. He said the NRA might have power over you, but it doesn't have power over him. I hope they don't have power over him. I don't want the NRA, even though I'm a lifelong member of the organization, I don't want them to have power over the president. I don't want them to have power over any of the politicians. We send people to Washington to make laws that are for the people, of the people, and by the people. That's what we want. We want them to make common sense decisions. Now, we know that the system has gotten so muddled down with interest group politics that sometimes it really gets out of control. And right now, I think it's at one of those points where things are out of control. And I give the president credit because he's done something that basically has never happened before relative to the fallout of these sorts of catastrophes. He's having meaningful dialogue. In the past, an event would happen. Typically, the left would cry and scream and yell and say that the guns are the problem, we got to do more gun control, and the right would say, no, that's not the issue, why don't you just calm down? And after a few days it would kind of go away, and every once in a while it would pick up again, but the president's not going to let that happen this time, and that's a good thing. Now, what that means is there's going to have to be some discussion, and there's going to have to be some compromise. And compromise, this is another new concept to the people who've been playing the game for many years. Compromise means both sides come together, they put all the issues that are important to them on the table, and they start sorting through what they can live with and what they can't live with, and both sides get a little bit of the pie. And that's a totally new concept, and that hasn't happened in a long time. And I give the president great credit for perpetuating a situation whereby that is meaningful right now. And I don't think anybody that stands by doubts it. Matter of fact, several of the senators and other congressmen, I think they were taken aback by the fact that he's sticking to it. He's having open meetings, he's having closed meetings, he's requiring committees to go back and discuss matters and come to him with a resolution. He's offered some solutions relative to the current situation. I think the most prominent is he is in favor of arming teachers. Now, contrary to the popular misbelief, he's not talking all teachers, he's talking about the few that decide to do it, that go through the proper training and or have some training and are ready, willing, and capable to serve in that capacity. And that's a very small percentage of the overall number of teachers in this country. It's not the tens of millions of teachers that are out there. Matter of fact, you and I both know there are most teachers that we wouldn't want in that situation. They wouldn't want to be in it, and they wouldn't want to be in it. They're not going to be. That's plain and simple. So that's the one thing he's promoting right now. Teachers be part of that security response in schools to be able to immediately respond to extreme acts of violence. He's also talking about improving the background check system. The NICS fix, he's a promoter of the NICS fix. However, I personally have a problem that we have to, I think NICS fix is a good thing, but I think it's problematic that we have to incentivize people to do what they're supposed to do. In other words, report the crimes that they're supposed to report to the respective databases so it can be entered into the national background system. I liken it to raising kids. I raised 6 of them, and I think I got a good handle on this. I said, if my kid came home from school and he was not studying and he was getting bad grades, the current philosophy would be, a like and similar response would be, oh, I'm sorry, Joey, you're not doing very well, so how about if I give you an allowance and I buy you an iPod and maybe that'll motivate you to do your schoolwork? My approach was quite the opposite. I said, hey, your duty is to go to school, get good grades, and do your work, and if you don't, I'm going to punish you. I'm going to take things away from you. I'm going to take your iPod away from you. I'm not going to let you participate in extracurricular activities. In the case at hand, the people who aren't reporting the data that they're required by law to report, they should be fired and or criminally prosecuted, period. Not much difficulty behind that. I don't know why we stress so much about some of those problems, but that's one of the things that I think we need to move forward with. I think it's a good thing. He is also for closing the gun show loophole, another controversial issue. What they're referring to there is people can go to a gun show any weekend out of the year, and without going through a background check, they can buy a firearm face-to-face from somebody who's not a federal firearms licensed dealer, private individuals who are there. And there are a number of cases who are slipping through the cracks, undoubtedly in that particular case. So when you look at the main things he's advocating right now, in addition to that, he's talking about raising the age to 21 for purchase of AR-style rifles. Now, they've talked both ways about raising the age 21 for purchase of any firearm and raising the age 21 for purchase of AR rifles. I personally have an issue with raising the age to 21 for purchase of rifles in general, because you've got, say, women, for example, between the ages of 18 and not yet 20. They can't own a handgun, so it's going to be up to them owning some sort of a long gun if they want to engage in self-defense. If they want to participate in hunting or other shooting sports, they're going to have to do it under the direction of other people older than 21, whereas now many late teens, early adults, I guess when you're between 18 and 21, if you're old enough to vote, you're old enough to be out on your own, you should be old enough to own a firearm. Now, certainly if they move it to just restriction of the AR, I think they need to think about making exceptions for people who are in the military. We're going to let them go out in the military and go overseas and fight with the gun that when they come home they can't own. Makes no sense. How ridiculous. Again, focus on the object is creating madness in this entire discussion. But those are the things he promotes, and I think those are reasonable measures that at least need to be on the table for discussion. One other issue that comes up frequently, although he's had opinions both ways, is the national reciprocity. I think the national reciprocity is a critical component to any legislation moving forward relative to any of the other things that have been recommended by the president, by members of Congress, or even by certain citizens who have voiced their opinion. Now let me switch gears just a little bit to the Florida legislature. As a result of the incident down there, they've come up with three primary initiatives that they're going to implement as part of their reform of some of the circumstances. Number one, arming teachers. That was unequivocal. They said they're going to arm the teachers after they train them. Obviously, they're going to have a selection process. Only people that want to do it are going to be involved, and only people who pass the relatively rigorous training are going to be there. They're also talking about raising the age to purchase AR-type rifles to 21. In addition, they talk about target hardening. Target hardening could be everything from bulletproof glass to metal detectors to implementing the ALICE system for a response to that. But first and foremost, they're arming the teachers, recognizing the fact that things are probably going to happen and they need to have a means to immediately counteract those things with people who are ready, willing, and on the premises. So I think that's important, and they're moving in a favorable direction. The NRA has been relatively quiet. Dana Loesch has spoken out about those three things I mentioned, about concerns about people not being able to defend themselves, not being able to hunt, not being able to enjoy the competitive shooting sports when they're in between the ages of 18 and 21. If you make all guns restricted till they're 21, there's a lot of problems with that. I think it's something they can discuss and come to a meaningful compromise. The NRA has talked about not having any concerns about the proposal to greatly limit or totally eliminate purchase or manufacture, sale, and purchase of bump stocks, and they're truly in favor of the NICS fix. They and the National Shooting Sports Foundation were instrumental in getting the initial background check system implemented years ago when it was in place, and when the Congress couldn't do it, the NRA and the National Shooting Sports Foundation took the lead in that. I want to close out today by just talking about some numbers that kind of put things in perspective. And again, one of my jobs is to educate you, because there's a lot of things thrown out there that aren't totally true. Let's look at some real data gathered from the most recent year available of the Uniform Crime Reporting database from the FBI. The FBI Uniform Crime Report gathers all data on all criminal acts throughout the country, and we're going to talk specifically about murders. 2016 is the last full year they have data for. So in 2016, there were 15,070 homicides in the country. Of those, 11,004 were perpetrated with guns. Of the 11,004 that were perpetrated with guns, 7,105 were with handguns, 374 were with rifles, 262 were with shotguns, and then the missing number there is in the categories of investigations that are still going. It's not yet known, or it's unreported. So the one thing I want to mention, the total number of homicides in 2016 was 15,070. The number of rifles, not shotguns, used
was 374. Remember that number because it's important. I also want to mention that that same year, knives accounted for 1,604 fatalities, and blunt objects such as hammers and clubs and similar objects accounted for 472. So those are some real data. You can go to the FBI Uniform Crime Reports on the internet and get accurate data. And again, that's the most recent full year. They've only got half of 2017, so it's information still coming. They're always a year behind in gathering the data. The point I want to make is this. Let's compare those items and those numbers to some things in everyday life. They're pointing to the AR rifle in this particular case, and it's kind of got the focus of the conversation on a national basis. This object, an AR black rifle, is the problem. Let me first of all mention that the real problem and the real cause of this was the individual who perpetrated the crime. I mentioned that last time, but I want to direct people back to that. He's the person responsible. All the other things they talk about, from the way things slip through the cracks, through the FBI, through the school system, through here, through there, the response of the police departments, those are all symptomatic things that need to be addressed after the fact. But the real source of the problem is the individual that committed 17 homicides and multiple other felonious assaults. But let's look at objects. In 2016, again, the most recent year data is available from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. You can get that in for NHTSA. It's frequently referred to as NHTSA, NHTSA. There were about 37,461 traffic deaths. That year, cell phones attributed to 3,450 distracted driving categorized deaths. Remember that number, 3,450 caused by people distracted, mostly by cell phones in their cars. That same year, 10,497 fatalities were attributed to DUI-related accidents. So of the 37,461, 10,497 had elements of DUI there. In other words, the person responsible for the accident was under the influence. So if you look at these numbers that I've just mentioned to you, and let's just take two. The total number of rifles attributed to death in 2016 was 374. 374 deaths attributed to rifles. That same year, 3,450 cell phones attributed to death in car accidents, and 10,497 DUI acts contributed to death. Now here, this is how ridiculous the argument about the object is. In the case of the traffic accidents, is the cell phone to blame or the individual who purposely distracted themselves and used the cell phone? Is the alcoholic beverage to blame, or is it the person who irresponsibly consumed alcohol to the point where they got too impaired to be able to drive? Is the car, the inanimate object, the car, responsible, or was it the individual who chose to get behind the wheel of the car intoxicated and commit the act? And then in the case of what happened in Florida and every other case, is it the gun or the individual who chose to use the gun to commit the crime? Now, I got to close by just mentioning that when you look at the totality of everything that's going on out there, a lot of this is being driven by emotion. We got to sit back, we got to talk about facts. We have to engage in meaningful dialogue, and we have to look towards where we're going to be in the future. In closing, I think it's important that we just continue the dialogue, that we listen to what's going on. We understand it's going to have to be a discussion. It's going to have to be a two-way flow of information back and forth, and they're going to have to come to some consensus. You can argue one way or the other how you feel about President Trump, but one thing, I've not read it yet, I'll probably read it or I'll have someone else read it and highlight it for me, but when he wrote the book, Art of the Deal, he's pretty darn good at getting people to make deals and compromises. And it's already been manifested in several decisions about different issues that have come up over the last year. And I think this is going to really be a very telling moment for not only him, but the other legislators who are going to realize they're going to have to start coming together and working together to work for us, the people, to get things done that are going to benefit we, the people. Till next time, I'm Jeff Pedro at SimTrainer.